so that is what people say. There is a tree on Allen Ford. I drive by it each day on my way to and from work. There are always flowers left there each day, left for a, oh, so that is what people say. And all I see looks back at me. There is a tree.
About a dozen years ago, I took a trip on a sailing ship through the Great Barrier Reef in the wake of Captain Cook. It was a BBC television series reenacted under 18th century conditions, and it was awful. I remember having to climb up a mast 149 feet high, swaying in the wind. I remember having to bite on ship's biscuits that were so hard that the reef sharks in the water couldn't snap through them. And I remember sleeping, or trying to sleep for a few hours at night, in a 14-inch hammock with somebody else's nose inches, somebody else's bottom inches from my nose. But it was much worse for Captain Cook. For Captain Cook and his men, the Great Barrier Reef was an insane labyrinth. It was a place of terror, where their ships might be wrecked and where they might be drowned or marined on a barren landscape filled, as they thought, with man-eating cannibals. Captain Cook actually didn't really know very much about the reef. He certainly didn't know how vast it was. If he'd gone up in a helicopter, as I've done since, he might have had some idea of how enormous this great phenomenon is. He'd never have believed, though, that it was bigger than the place he came from, the whole of the British Isles put together, plus Ireland. In fact, no human eyes have ever taken it in, except for astronauts, because for astronauts it's the only organic thing visible from outer space. It is nearly 2,500 kilometres long. Captain Cook didn't know either that the beautiful island that he just called Dunk, after a mediocre Admiralty apparatchik, was really Kunangalbar, the dreaming place and the heartland of the Jiru and the Banjang people. People for whom it had delivered bounty in a balanced way for thousands of years. And it was these people who passed their knowledge over to a journalist who came there, Ted Banfield. And he transformed that knowledge into books that took the Great Barrier Reef and Dunk Island into the world as a paradise, as a place where human discontents could disappear under the great tonic of sea and sun and sand. Cook would never have believed either, never in a million years have believed that people would come to see the Barrier Reef as a fragile treasure, as something threatened, its whole existence threatened by human actions. I never began to believe that until during that reenactment, when one day I was shown by a young biologist on Lizard Island the transformation of corals from multicoloured glory to stark white skeletons because of the warm water that we humans were now creating. I remember taking a last swim when I left Lizard Island in a sober and sombre mood. I remember going under that beautiful water and seeing goggle-eyed parrotfish flicking through this luminous violet coral. And at that moment I felt a terrible sadness, and everything around me, even the faux Hawaiian resort round the corner, seemed inexpressibly precious. Now that we've entered the geological age of the Anthropocene, an age where many of us believe that humans are actually influencing the physical forces of nature for the very first time. Now that means that we humans can damage and even extinguish the major products of nature. And this is the reason I'm talking to you tonight. And it's also the reason that I've just written a book called The Great Barrier Reef, A Passionate History. It's a book about encounters between reef places and reef peoples, between environments and ideas over 2 centuries. And I suppose I begin it with the bewildered trip of Captain Cook through the barrier reef that he didn't really know existed. And I end it with the searing mission of Charlie Verron, one of the world's greatest coral scientists, whose mission it is to tell Australians and the world that the reef is deeply endangered for its very existence. When writing the book, I also discovered something else I think of great significance to me, and that is that the people who best understood the significance and value of the Great Barrier Reef were people who crossed over the divide that usually separates the human sciences and the human arts. So I'm going to tell you in the next time we meet why the reef is dying, and I look forward to that. Thank you.
Every drop of rain that fell or falls keeps falling on and on and on.
Chest.
Does the pain go anywhere else?
It's going down both my arms.
Can you take a big deep breath for me, please? I don't know what's wrong with you. I don't know how to help you.
The reef is dying like this poor woman because human beings are hurting it. And they're hurting it in 6 ways. Reefs are like the canaries in the mines of old. One tiny whiff of climate change makes them susceptible and keel over and die. They are hurt by human beings through human-induced climate change 6 ways. First, by cyclones, stronger and more consistent than ever before. Second, by pollution that comes from sewage and from chemicals from the cane farms, and comes from silt dumped into the sea by our government so that it can choke the corals. And it comes, and the hurt comes from the pollution itself creates an environment in which starfish thrive. A tsunami of coral-eating starfish are eating up the reef. And the fish are dying, so that there are no fish to gobble up the algae, and it's turning into slime and rubble. And the other thing that's happening, the worst thing, is the warming water is expelling the little algae that gives it colour and energy. And the water is not only too hot, it is becoming too acid. It is turning into acid from the CO2 in the air and from the methane. And that acid is beginning to dissolve the limestone of the reef like you dissolve an antacid tablet when you swallow it with indigestion. And the reef, because its acid is dissolving, it has osteoporosis, and gradually it will disappear and die. That is the sixth reason, and at that point we will have reached the sixth mass extinction of mankind.
Okay, I'm gonna need ICU, excuse
I'm on the edge of tears, and I don't know why. They're right behind my eyes, my lips, my teeth. They're caught in my throat. I feel. What do I feel? Enraged, frustrated, melancholy, numb. The whole world around me is oblivious to my pain. How can they not know what has been lost?
I think that the climate change science is far from settled. The fact that we've had, if anything, cooling global temperatures over the last decade, notwithstanding continued dramatic increases in carbon dioxide emissions, suggests that the role of CO2 is not nearly as clear as the climate catastrophists would suggest. I also think that if you want to put a price on carbon, why not just do it with a simple tax? Why not ask motorists to pay more? Why not ask electricity consumers to pay more? And then at the end of the year you can take your invoices to the tax office and get a rebate of the carbon tax you've paid. It would be burdensome, all taxes are burdensome, but it would certainly change the price of carbon, raise the price of carbon without increasing in any way the overall tax burden.
Is there any hope for the reef? After I've been giving a long story of despair and fear? Oddly enough, I think the hope for the reef lies in catastrophe. One of the most inspiring things that's happened to me is a group of people at Mission Beach came and asked me to work with them. It's a small community that has been hit by 2 cyclones 4 years apart that have smashed the community to pieces and many of their buildings. And an odd thing's happened as a result of that for the very first time the community really is a community. The environmentalists, the conservationists, and the business people, the tourist developers, the fishermen are working together, trying to rebuild their community in a way that will be different. Rebuilding the houses so that they will hopefully sustain cyclonic forces. Building their houses further back from the water, making them stronger. Building an interpretation centre that tells the inspirational story of how the reef was saved by 3 ordinary citizens, a poet, an artist, and a forester in the 1970s against the massed forces of miners, of government politicians, and of developers. And that story will be echoed in the rebuilding of Mission Beach as an echo place, a place which is friendly to cassowaries as it's friendly to tourists. And an old house that belonged to John Boost, one of the original pioneers of that fight, is still standing. It was the first cyclone-proof house ever built in Australia, and he built it in 1957 with his hands. And it's unbelievably beautiful. It looks over the reef, and just behind you is the most ancient forest in the world. 46 million years old forest that used to be part of Gondwana land. And that house has 8 bedrooms and 8 bathrooms and a large space. And we're going to try and get together and build a research centre there for people to come from all over the world, environmentalists, scientists, artists, to celebrate the reef and try to work out ways of rebuilding it. That's the only way in which we can express hope. Thank you.